Hello, welcome to our third segment on prophetic preaching. This will be, I think, a pretty short segment just talking about some of the practical strategies we can use and avoid as preachers who are seeking to shape congregational culture in this area of being more missional and letting our preaching be more prophetic. And so I have a few strategies for you to think about. And the first is really a question for you is, are you being transformed throughout the week as you take risks to follow Jesus Christ into acts of justice and mercy? So we can't preach on this with any integrity on Sunday if we are not ourselves actually in our communities, getting to know the poor, their needs, making choices to use our time and our money and our skills to come along beside children and adults in our community who are in need, and being shaped by that. And that will give us integrity to call others to lives of risky obedience. And we can, there are probably some congregational culture issues to address in this as well, and even understanding of what is the preacher's role. And there are congregations who will bless and release you to take an evening to go and work at the soup kitchen or the homeless shelter, and there are others who will say, no, we want your eye on the ball of our congregation's growth, and don't get distracted by serving on the board for Habitat or something like that. And so some of this will take some shaping and instructing your own people that this is part of your calling and that this will redound to the good of your congregation as well. And in the inverse, some of us need to see that as well, that there are pastors I know who think of this as kind of the periphery of our ministry. And I saw this pretty dramatically when I was a new pastor of a church in a pretty poor area, and they hosted it was a weekly dinner, but 4 churches alternated hosting a Friday night dinner with all sorts of other resources offered at that dinner. Various agencies came to the dinner and offered things for people. It's a really good event. And my church hosted it once a month. We made the whole meal. It was over 100 people came to it. And so first Friday that it was offered, I went to it. And 2 things that were striking about that. One, several people who cook for it every month in, month out, had stopped coming to church. And they just continued doing that, but that was their one sort of Christian thing that they did related to our church any longer, which was kind of sad. And one of the things they said was that the previous pastor had alienated them, in part because he never came once to the dinner, and he said, this isn't really central to the work of this church, so I'm not going to I have limited time, and I'm not going to come and visit this ministry. Glad you guys are doing it, but good luck to you. And this had been quite hurtful to them, how dismissive he was. And I noticed them in church the next Sunday. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I began to highlight that as an example of a way we can respond in obedience to some of the texts I was preaching. And I got more volunteers instead of just this faithful core who'd been doing it for years. It grew because they came and because other people heard that I was enjoying it. So I don't say that all to boast. It was just a really blessed thing that I got to be part of in encouraging that ministry, and because I enjoyed it so much myself. So take the time to invest yourself in your city and your people and talk about it. That way you can witness to it. You can testify to your own joy and sorrow, struggle and hope. And I have on the website in your sermon resources section a wonderful sermon. It's Brian Stevenson, if some of you know him, African American. It's not brilliant exegesis of a text particularly, but it's a powerful, I love the way that he testifies in that sermon to his own joy and sorrow and in how he's seen God at work for him as he has labored on behalf of the poor and the voiceless in the South. And so I encourage you, if you're looking for a good example of invitation without guilting, without scolding or shaming or haranguing, just simply on the basis of his own testimony of the goodness of it. There's a very good model of that in the Brian Stevenson sermon that's on our website. So as you witness is a powerful tool and in our arsenal as prophetic preachers. And the other tool is, I would say, patience and hope are the virtues that I'm thinking of here, and celebrating the days of small things, having the eyes to see the steps that people are taking in your congregation, the good that you see going on, and highlighting it, and not being impatient with the smallness of it, but being on the lookout for faithfulness in our members' lives, and without maybe naming names too much in inappropriate ways, bringing that before the whole congregation, celebrating that. Not many of us are going to be able to look back on our lives and say that we were at the vanguard of a national shift towards more just policies the way Peter Story really can in South Africa, or a King, or even a Brian Stevenson. But all of us can look back and say that we moved our local community toward justice in a few areas, that we propelled our congregations outward into our communities, and even into the world in simple, small, but godly gospel ways. That's a good thing. And in our preaching, it's just, as I said, it's specificity that gets us into trouble, but it's also specificity that gives preaching its power. And here, what I'm thinking of is be specific with names and faces of individuals who are affected by injustice, and by disregard for the environment or for human life, and name those names and help people to connect with real people and not just with issues and statistics. And my fifth strategy for you is the end. It's not quite the end of this lecture, but it's my second to last point. But the end is powerful for us because it is powerful in terms of preaching for justice, because it is the triumph of our just judge and king. It is the day in which justice will finally be achieved, that justice that we can never bring about ourselves. And it is the day when there will be a victory of God over all evil that afflicts us. And so I love Thomas Long's perspective on the eschaton in our preaching will allow us to preach the prophetic call for justice, not on the basis of guilt or moralism or political correctness, but on the basis that the prophets did, a joyful, even festive response to God's inbreaking future. The prophetic preachers who do it well and that I enjoy listening to and that it really move me have just a beautiful and deep abiding vision of the kingdom that God is bringing and a longing for it, and they bring that into their preaching often. And though we can think of that end as way off in the distance, who knows? But it is interesting that actually Peterson points out that eschatological preaching gives us urgency. That he says that without it, the line goes slack. It gets sort of fluffy and fuzzy. But with eschatological preaching, it actually is pulling us to the heights. It is holiness. And here I want to just be sure to clarify, I've had students occasionally say, hey, are you against chaplaincies? I am all for police, hospital, military chaplaincies. Those are very important roles that we play. And even some of you listening are chaplains or preparing to be chaplains. But court chaplaincy in Peterson and Borgeman, in the court chaplaincy in the Old Testament particularly, and in Europe throughout the many centuries, is the prophet or the preacher who is sort of paid to preach to the king and preach to the court in often a way that is simply putting a religious stamp on what the king already wants to do, and that's what he's saying, sprinkling holy water on where we're already headed as listeners too often into consumerism, complacency, and using religion just for our own gratification. So that's what he is opposed to here, is that kind of chaplaincy. The last strategy is to invite people to specific actions this week and also long term, taking this week to plan for the long term. So having something, especially on a week when you're preaching prophetically, having a specific invitation, a step people can take to respond that you're going to join, you're going to be part of, that you can honestly say, hey, we're going this week. Sign up today. Come join us. Or a specific action step for a couple or individuals to say, turn to each other and pick an evening this week and put it on your calendar. This is one time where we're okay with phones being used during the sermon, is put it on your calendar, a night this week where you're going to extend your table. You're going to invite a stranger, someone in need, or you're going to go out instead of having dinner at home. You're going to go out as a family to serve together. Or take an evening to review your finances, or take an evening as a small group to dream about how you could act as a group. And I was part of a small group which just had a regular rhythm of every fourth meeting we didn't meet to study the Bible in a home. We served together, and that was a great rhythm for that small group. Great experience. The second to last one is to plan next summer now, and I'll just share that that is especially for young families, or for mid-range families with middle schoolers or even high schoolers. It is so easy to just let summer come and let the world, the culture, fill our summers. But we can lead, and the church can lead and offer something better. And I think we just need some confidence that we have some better things to offer and some intentionality in this area. And so I know that for my own family, we covenanted with another family that we were going to take 2 weeks of the following summer to do something missional together, and we did. We went to Guatemala as two families, but it took thinking that through together back in November. So it doesn't just happen in May. So, but there are some windows in the lives of your members, and they will fill quickly with soccer and everything else and summer camp. But you have an opportunity there to invite your members to do some long-term planning that towards mission and justice and experiential learning about the poor and other cultures and things like that. So be bold to ask your people to do some long-range planning. So think specifically short-term and think big dream long-term as well. So those are some of the strategies some of the invitations that I think we can be making. And as we close, I'm just asking you to reflect on which of these strategies does your church already do well? Do you have a number of settings in which people can say yes to the invitation to take a step towards the poor, towards justice? Do you have, and how would you like to grow as a preacher and a leader in this area? And what's the hardest part of this for you? For you as a speaker, and the hardest part that you anticipate in terms of the biggest points of resistance in your congregation in this area. So those are some things to think about, and it's been enjoyable to think together with you about missional or prophetic preaching. Very, very important dimension of what it means to be faithful preachers today, I believe. Thank you.